Hello, friends. Thank you for joining us today. The Adventure Sports Podcast has done quite a few interviews on Mount Everest. I mean, the tallest mountain in the world, right? It's an amazing thing. But today, we're kind of going to interview the interviewer. And what I mean by that is we have Alex Harz with us. And Alex is a filmmaker and creator of a documentary about the whole Everest, not just the mountain, but about what it means to the local people and the culture, and especially Nepal and Sherpas. And so we're going to dive into kind of the backstory behind Everest. Not just, hey, I got to the top, but instead, what does Everest really mean in the light of these very unique and special people? So, Alex, welcome to the program.
Hey, Kurt, it's great to be with you, and thank you so much for taking your time to sit down and talk.
It's going to be fun. I love talking about Everest, but I think talking about the people means a lot more to me than the mountain, actually, just to be candid. And so I'm looking forward to this a lot. So where are you today?
Right now I'm in Denver, Colorado. Yeah, so that's where if I'm not traveling, working on a documentary, for the Quest series, I try to call home here around the Denver area.
That's great. Yeah, and I saw that you went to CU.
I did, yeah. I graduated from CU, and it was one of those things. I used to live in Omaha, Nebraska, prior to coming to Colorado, and I actually spent 1 year at the University of Nebraska in Omaha before I came out to Colorado. Didn't know a single person the first day I drove up to Boulder. I couldn't even tell you where it was on a map if you put it in front of me. So it was one of those things, typical thing for a Colorado transplant. You come out for 2 weeks, go skiing, snowboarding, or visiting, and then you just never leave. And that's kind of what happened with me. I ended up enrolling to the University of Colorado instead of going back to Nebraska for school, and I never left since.
Yeah, it's a beautiful story, actually. It's a very common theme, but I love it because what that shows is how much you appreciate natural environments and adventure and opportunity to experience this planet in ways that not everybody gets to. And I think it's easy living in a place like Boulder or Denver or Gunnison, for that matter, to start to take it for granted and think, well, this is normal. The reality is most people don't live in places like these, and it really is an amazing experience. And
no, you're absolutely spot on, Kurt. Yeah, you're absolutely spot on. It's exactly right. And I think maybe if I would have grown up in Colorado, you're right, I might have taken that for granted. But coming from the flatlands of the Midwest and then being awed by these amazing mountains and all the different activities out here that are completely different than what I'd grew up doing during a child. I was a soccer player, competitive soccer player. I actually played soccer at the University of Colorado as well. And so completely different atmosphere with regards to what the outdoors have to offer, and the ability to access those outdoors when you see something new like that. So yeah, it was a very eye-opening experience to come out to Colorado for the first time.
So I have a unique question for you based on personal experience. I grew up in northeastern Oklahoma in the foothills of the Ozarks. And it's a very heavily forested area with deciduous trees. And usually you're able to see about a quarter mile at top, right? I mean, if you get a view bigger than a quarter mile, you feel like you're really on top of something big because the trees just kind of hug you and you don't get to see much. So when I moved to Colorado, couldn't judge distance. I would look out at the mountains and I would think, oh, that's like a half mile away, and it would be 5 miles away, And I even felt like my eyesight was tricking me, like it was an optical illusion. Now, coming from Nebraska, you had a lot longer field of vision growing up, but you didn't have the mountains. So what was the impact on you when you came to Colorado?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And even today, the perception of distance is still a little bit skewed because you're right. The mountains are so grandiose, and when you go to a place like Everest, it's of course heightened.
Even more.
Yeah, even more. But it's one of those things. You're right. You think, oh, it's just right there, but it's not. It's just because the scale of it is so much bigger. Than just being in an oak tree, area, for example. And you have to kind of, like you say, step out the forest to see into that forest. Yes. And yeah, that's exactly right. It is definitely something that opened my eyes big time because a lot of it also has to do with the dry, high, crisp air that we have out here
Yes.
versus the humidity of Nebraska and Oklahoma, which a lot of times the visibility was cut short just because of how humid, the air was, right? Where out here you can see as far as the eye can see once you're on top of a 14er, for example, looking across the range. So, yeah, it was definitely a very impactful experience for me coming out here, and to be able to now step my feet into the environment that was so impressive.
Hmm. Okay. Well, we promised we were going to talk about Everest or all the things associated with Everest. And that's what I'm really excited about. So, what gave you the idea? I'm going to go to Nepal. I'm going to make the documentary. I'm going to do Everest, but I want to make sure that we capture this in a unique and insightful way. Where did that come from?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it kind of rewinds a little bit to Omaha, Nebraska. And the way it all started was one day I was coming back from a soccer practice. Like I said, I was a competitive soccer player, and so I had practice or games every single day, 2 hours plus a day. And I was coming back from a practice. I was 14 years old, and first thing I did is I sat down on the couch and did what I usually did was open up a bag of Doritos and drank some Mountain Dew, which of course nowadays sounds horrible, but when you're a young kid, you didn't know anything about caloric intake and what was good or bad for you at the time. And I turned on the TV and I saw something about Mount Everest, and I said to myself, one day I'm going to climb that mountain. Out of
Wow.
sight, out of mind for a long time. I ended up graduating, from Central High School in Omaha, Nebraska. Like I said, I went 1 year to the University of Nebraska in Omaha. Then I came out to Colorado, and at that time I wasn't into climbing, I wasn't into snowboarding, skiing really. I wasn't really doing much of that stuff. I did a little bit of the snowboarding and skiing because I was at CU Boulder, but I never was into trad climbing or any mountaineering stuff. It wasn't really in my
Yeah.
wheelhouse. One day I'm sitting on a couch in Denver, Colorado, watching random daytime television. Absolutely nothing to do with Mount Everest. Could have been Ellen DeGeneres. It could have been a game show. I have no idea what it was. But for some stupid reason, that recollection of that childhood promise that I gave to myself when I was 14 years old, that I told myself one day I will climb Everest, popped back in my head. And the next
Hmm.
day, I started that journey. I had no idea how to go about it, but I knew that if I couldn't keep a promise to myself, how could I ultimately honor my commitments to anyone else? So I went out that weekend. It was the middle of January. I climbed my first 14er with snowboarding gear on, way overloaded, way too many layers on, sweating my butt off, post-holing to try to make my way to the summit. And I ultimately did make my way to the summit, but it was absolutely miserable. It was absolutely miserable. I hated every minute of it. Did
Gray's
a couple
Peak.
more. Yeah. What's that?
Was it Gray's Peak?
No, it was actually a Quandary Peak outside of
Quandary. There you
Breckenridge.
go.
Yeah,
Yep.
yep. That was the first one. And then I did a couple more like that, Sherman and so on. And then I was like, God, this is miserable. And then I realized, okay, I got it. If I really want to make this Everest dream a reality, I got to get serious about it. So I enrolled in the Colorado Mountain School and I started learning about, glacier travel, wilderness survival,
Mm.
rock climbing, trad climbing, lead climbing, sport climbing, all the different techniques that you use when you go to these big mountains, and started that process to be serious about it. And I went out to Mount Rainier out in Washington, climbed Mount Rainier. I went down to Argentina and climbed the highest mountain in South America known as Aconcagua. I went up to Alaska and climbed Denali. And then the epiphany came. I'm standing on the summit of Alaska at about 11:30 at night under that perpetual Alaskan summer sun, which was me and my climbing partner, and we're looking out of the beautiful Alaska range. And then I said to myself, you know what? I can't put all this time, effort, money, and risk into standing on top of a summit that is as beautiful as this mountain that I was currently at, being Denali,
Yeah.
just for me to go to Everest for this, selfish dream, to try to honor that dream. And so I had to do something bigger with it. And then that's where the idea of the Quest series began. I said, you know what? I know that 99% of the world will never have the opportunity or the desire to want to climb Mount Everest. So why don't I see if I can bring them along on this journey and dig deep to what Everest is all about? So we decided to go and start, putting this 2D documentary together because I have my film experience and international business experience in the background. I started to utilize all those skills to say, all right, let's make this into a production and make this something that other people can go along with me instead of just me standing up there and then fulfilling this dream. Then as we started getting deeper into the production and the planning and stuff, because we had 7 2D cameras, then we ended up going with a virtual reality camera as well. I said, why don't I try to shoot this thing in virtual reality as well and give people the closest possible experience of what it's like to climb the mountain without being dumb enough to get off the couch and trying it yourself? Because I used to love these first-person shooter video games. And so in those
Mm,
first-person shooter video games, you kind of get that perspective of being there. What is it like to actually be in a war scene or be in this virtual environment? And I said, what if I had people climb with me with a virtual reality camera, over my shoulder? Then you're actually climbing with me in first person. You're able to look down into the crevasses when I cross a ladder. You're able to climb the Hillary Step with me, stand on the summit hopefully with me, and look 200 miles into India, 200 miles into Nepal, 200 miles into Tibet as far as the eye can see the curvature of the earth, the whole nine. If I'm able to pull that off, that could be a pretty cool thing because, again, like I said, 99% of the people will never have that opportunity. Why not see if I can take them along on that? And I added that to our production element. So we made it a little bit more complicated by adding the VR component as well. But I'm humbly honored to have been able to climb the mountain and come back down with 63 hours of content to now be able to share with the world and take people on these 2D and virtual reality educational thrill rides, up Mount Everest.
nice. So tell us the name of the two products so that everyone knows what you're talking about. But then I want to dive into the cultural side of the story.
Yeah, very
So
true. So go ahead.
um the the Quest Everest
Yep.
VR, is that what it's called?
Yeah, the Quest Everest VR is the virtual reality film that's 26 minutes long,
And
and
where
you're
do people
actually
find it?
so you can go to thequesteverest.com, and there you can see the links. You can watch the trailer in 360, and then you can see the links of the different platforms where it's available. You can watch it in MetaQuest, Apple Vision Pro, all the different VR platforms, but also in 2D on your computer or cell phone or tablet, through Vimeo and Arrival Space and other couple platforms. You can actually spin the mouse around and look down, look up in 360 degrees, which is the
Nice.
next best thing for those people that don't have a headset. Then the other component is the Quest Everest documentary. So we have the Quest Everest VR, which is the 26-minute virtual reality documentary, and then you have the Quest Everest, which is your traditional 2D documentary. That's 97 minutes long. That's on Apple TV and Amazon Prime and these kind of things. And again, you can go to thequesteverest.com. Both of those productions are there at thequesteverest.com, where you can link through and find the different platforms and watch the trailers.
Okay. Let's enter into the cultural aspects of this, but let's do it from this perspective. We have a lot of preconceived ideas whenever we go to visit a new culture, a country where we haven't been. And we've heard things, people have told us things, we've seen pictures, movies, what have you. But it's never quite what you thought when you get there. So, what was the first big surprise that you encountered in Nepal?
Yeah, right when I got off the airplane. The instant noise and, the organized chaos, as I like to call it, in Nepal. It's a country that, is hectic and almost somewhat 50 years behind hypercharging into the 21st century. So it's a very interesting dichotomy. You see the dirt roads, the dust in the air, all the motorbikes, the tuk-tuks and these kind of things that are, not really in the times when it comes to 2025. But on the same token, you could see Nepal driving very fast into the future. The other thing is Nepal is the 165th poorest country in the world, so it's not a wealthy country at all. And so
Mm,
you can see exactly how different it is from, let's say, Denver, Colorado, where I came from on the way over there. The other thing that you feel about Nepal right away is the deep spirituality. It's basically a Hindu country. 88% of the people there are Hindus, even though Buddhism actually started in Nepal. So you've got two of the five main religions that are really dominant in Nepal, but 88% of the people actually follow Hinduism, and that's from the Indian side of things. So, the Indian influence brings that Hindu element into it. And so you can see the spirituality everywhere around you. You just feel it. And then when you go up into the Khumbu Valley towards Mount Everest, you start to feel it in a different respect, and that is more the Buddhist side of things. And it's all around you, and the relationship of Buddhism to the Sherpa people and so on kind of shifts once you get up towards the mountains versus down into the Kathmandu Valley.
interesting. Was it a notable difference between the two perspectives? Are they in conflict with each other?
They're not in conflict at all with each other, but it is a notable difference. You really see it. With you have that. We went and filmed a lot of the cultural stuff. So we went to Pashupatinath Temple, down in Kathmandu, which is the oldest temple and the oldest site of worship in Nepal. It's mainly dedicated to the Lord Shiva. But what's really interesting when you go to a place like that, it's open 24/7, 7 days a week for worshipers to come. But what's really interesting and something that throws you back from coming from the West is they do open air cremations there. They have these concrete platforms known as ghats, and loved ones will bring their deceased relatives there, and they will sit there, and it takes 2 to 4 hours to burn a human body, old school Game of Thrones style, and to witness that all day, all night, and then to interview the Hindu sadhus, which are the holy wise men. They're basically akin to what a Catholic priest would be or an Islamic imam would be, to Islam or to Christianity, to then interview them and to understand their spirituality and that they denounced all worldly possessions and they live on the grounds. They actually don't have a home, and you really get really enthralled into this, into the Hindu culture there. But then come back to the hotel and kind of break away and get back into the noise of the city and break away into the modernality of Kathmandu and the hotel, and then to smell your shirt and realize it smelled like campfire. And I talked to my director of photography. I said, Sam, our shirts smell like campfire, but it's because of human bodies burning, not because we were sitting around roasting marshmallows somewhere out in the woods. And that really kind of hits home with you. And so that inundation into the culture right away was powerful, and the Hinduism is everywhere. And like I said, when you got up into the Khumbu Valley, and the Buddhism kind of became the dominant religion because the Sherpa people came over about 650 years ago from eastern Tibet, and they ended up in the Khumbu Valley. Well, what they brought with them was kind of a hybrid mix of Buddhism. They brought Bon mysticism that they combined with traditional Tibetan Buddhism to form kind of their spirituality of Buddhism there. And to see the prayer flags everywhere, to see, the stupas, the shrines up there. You can just feel it in every village that you hike through of the 9 days to get to Everest Base Camp, how powerful the Buddhism element is up there and how powerful the Sherpa people are engaged with their environment.
Let's make a point here. You said twice the Sherpa people, not the Sherpa carrying my load. Right? Explain that to us.
Yeah,
I think a lot of people don't understand.
Exactly, and that's one of the big differences in maybe in our films that we try to differentiate from other Everest films, because it's not really about me climbing the mountain. It's really about me being a conduit to the information and going up that mountain. And so interviewing the Sherpa people, interviewing those, Hindu sadhus that we talked about, and really telling their story, right? You're right, the Sherpa people, that is a big misnomer in a lot of Everest film and a lot of connotation in the West especially. They think, oh, the Sherpa, that means porter, or that means mountain guide, No, not at all. It's actually an ethnic group that, originally came from the Kham region of China or Tibet, modern day China today, and they migrated over, into Nepal out of basically a conflict that they had. They were being persecuted religiously is kind of the thought behind it. And then they moved towards the west, and then they actually climbed over the high passes, and they wanted to find a valley that they could peacefully set up their life and worship. And it happened to be the Khumbu Valley. Well, at the end of the Khumbu Valley, the dead end of the Khumbu Valley happens to be Mount Everest. And that, which is the border of China or Tibet and Nepal. And so because they just by happenstance happened to end up in the Khumbu Valley, and then 1953 May 29th came around, and Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay were the first ones to summit Mount Everest. That put the Khumbu Valley on the map. And then to a large degree, that put Nepal on the map, and it also put the Sherpa people on the map. Because of that 650 years of being in the Khumbu Valley, they've developed a genetic advantage to being at high altitude. And it only makes about a 10% difference. But that 10% difference is massive when you're talking about trying to survive at 29,032 feet or 8,849 meters, which is the summit of Everest. And specifically what the Sherpa people have developed, the adaptations that they have physiologically developed over that time of being in the Khumbu Valley, is their mitochondria is more efficient in burning oxygen. So therefore, at altitude, they're more efficiently operating than the average person. And B, they're in their extremities, they're able to get more blood flow out to their hands, to their feet, to their calves, to their forearms, and
Cool.
so on. So now they're able to be more strong, traditionally on each step, each stride. So their capillaries are actually more opened up and able to transfer more blood. And so these are the two genetic advantages that they developed over about 650 years that makes them suited to be perfect candidates, to take trekkers to Everest Base Camp or to take climbers like me up to the top of Mount Everest.
And it's very convenient that they live there.
That's right. And if you go two valleys over, it's a night and day story. It's amazing because the Sherpas were traditionally Himalayan salt traders and yak herders, right? That's what they traditionally were. So they didn't
Yeah.
have this economy that they have today with tea houses and guest houses and trekkers coming in helicopters and lodges and, all this stuff. For 2 months of the year in the spring season, the Khumbu Valley is actually the second richest part of Nepal, only because of all the trekking and hiking and climbing that goes on to Ama Dablam and to Mount Everest and so on. So you go two valleys over, they don't have Mount Everest at the end of their valley. Their lifestyle is completely different. A lot of them are still herders and traders, and their economy is not nearly as robust, all because of what sits at the end of their valley being Mount Everest.
A question occurred to me I don't know the answer to. Did the Sherpa people, when they moved into the valley, know that they were next to the tallest peak on Earth?
I don't think so. I don't think initially they did. I don't know that for sure. Obviously, I can't jump into a mind of a Sherpa that came over 650 years ago, but initially I don't think so because Mount Everest itself wasn't really deemed to be the highest mountain in the world until the Great Trigonometrical Survey of India that took place in the 1800s. Right? And so from 1856 to 1865, Mount Everest was known as Peak 15. And so when they started surveying the peaks of the Himalayas, they had an inclination that, well, that peak over there that we're going to call it Peak 15 might actually be the highest known point on Earth. Right, so prior to that, and then in 1865, it got named Mount Everest after the general surveyor, the guy who was in charge of this survey, George Everest. It was named after him, even though he never ever saw Mount Everest, never went to Everest Base Camp. It was his subordinate, his underling that worked for him. Out of respect for him, after they realized that it was the highest mountain, they named it after George Everest. And so basically up until that time, mathematically, there was no conclusion on whether or not Everest was the highest mountain in the world. So I would assume that the Sherpa people, for the longest time, did not know for sure that Mount Everest was the highest mountain. And how deep did they go down the Khumbu Valley, towards Everest Base Camp? I don't know when the first time the Sherpa ever made it to Everest Base Camp was.
Interesting. So for them, it may have just been, yeah, that's a really big one over there.
That's right. That's right. And it's peaceful, it's quiet, it's windy, it's cold, or it's whatever. But we're able to set up, terrace farming, and we're able to, herd our yaks here and so on, and live a very spiritual and peaceful life. And at the end, we had what they then deemed to be Goddess Mother of the Earth. So they definitely had an understanding that Mount Everest was there, because the Sherpa people called Mount Everest Choma Lungma, or Choma Mia Lungsama, which means Goddess Mother of the World or Goddess Mother of Earth. And so, like in the West, we have this kind of construct of what Goddess Mother of the Earth means to us. Oh, it's the sky, it's the ground, it's the flat land, it's whatever. But for the Sherpa people, it specifically relates to Mount Everest. That's also why you see, if you know anything about Mount Everest expedition climbing, before you can step foot on Mount Everest, you have to do a puja ceremony, which is conducted by the Sherpa. And that puja ceremony is basically a rite of passage asking Choma Lungma, the goddess mother of the world, for permission and safe travel to step on her vaulted slopes. And so, in order to step foot on the Goddess Mother of the World, you have to go through that puja ceremony. Whether you're religious or not, everybody has to undertake a puja ceremony before they can step foot in the Khumbu Icefall and start to climb up Mount Everest.
Interesting. I know that Ama Dablam is also a sacred peak.
Very much so. There's one there called Kumbala itself. So the Khumbu Valley, there's a peak named Kumbala, which is the most sacred peak within the Khumbu Valley outside of the Goddess Mother of the World. And it's never been climbed, and it's not allowed to be climbed. The Sherpas
Wow.
were not allowed to be climbed. There was a Polish team that actually tried to climb it, I think, in 1989, and all of them died of an avalanche. And of course, the Sherpa belief is because they were cursed. You are not allowed to climb Kumbala because the belief is that the god Khumbu, of the god of the Khumbu Valley, will come down and rain havoc on the Khumbu Valley, send down Yetis, armies of Yetis, and so on to pillage the valley, essentially like Vikings would. And so it is forbidden to climb Kumbala. And to this day, there has been no confirmed summits of Kumbala. And to this day, there has been no confirmed attempt of Kumbala since that Polish team tried it.
Interesting. You mentioned Yeti, and a lot of people probably heard that. What is the prevalence of the understanding about Yeti in the region?
Yeah, no, the Sherpa people believe in Yetis, and it's interesting. There's actually a monastery in Pengboche, which is one of the highest monasteries in the world, and I got to go inside that monastery, and I got to see inside of a box that's about this big is a scalp, and there's a claw, and they claim it to be a several hundred-year-old Yeti scalp and a Yeti claw, and I looked at it, and I don't know what it is, to be honest with you. It's very
It might be a
convincing that
Yeti.
it could be, but the story goes that one of the monks, he had a pet Yeti, and that was him, and he got killed. The Yeti itself got killed in an avalanche, and that was his claw, and that was his scalp, and it sits in this box, and it has been for hundreds of years. And I looked at it as close as I can from a lot of different angles and a lot of intrigue, and I said, that doesn't really look like a bear claw. It definitely does not look like a human hand. I don't know what that is. That's all I can say.
Interesting. Does the Yeti have a spiritual significance to the
Yeah, it
people?
does. It is a very spiritual animal or beast because of the multiple role. It's a protectorate as well as a destroyer. So it's a very powerful being within the Sherpa lore, and so yeah, the Yeti definitely holds prevalence in the valley. Of what the Yeti means to the Sherpa people if you ever were able to sight one, or whether or not you go back hundreds of years to where they were more prominently seen, reportedly.
How significant is Mount Everest and the whole industry around climbing it now? How significant is that to the Sherpa people these
Oh, it
days?
is everything. And you see it in our film, especially in the 97-minute documentary, because we have a lot of time to kind of unpack Mount Everest. We're in the 26-minute virtual reality film. You're going with me on the trek and the climb. And though there's a lot of voiceover and you learn a lot of stuff, we don't have the time to really dig as deep as we do in the 97-minute film with regards to the history of Everest climbing and what it means to them. But yeah, we've interviewed some of the Sherpa, and so you kind of have a mixed bag of feeling of what Everest means to the Sherpa. Some of the older Sherpas feel some guilt on climbing Mount Everest, because again, it's goddess Mother Earth, and the first time they go up there to climb Mount Everest, they feel almost somewhat guilty that they're stepping on their god of the world. After a couple times, that becomes less and less of a guilt complex. The younger Sherpas don't have as much of that. They're more tied into the Instagram. They're more tied into the economics of it all.
Sure.
So they're not really as attached as maybe as their parents or grandparents are with regards to the actual religious component of Mount Everest versus the economic component, the expedition component, and knowing that 2 months of the year, this is a huge source of income for them. Like I said, it's the second most wealthy part of Nepal during the spring climbing season, and also in the fall is also when people go trek to Everest Base Camp and spend time in the tea houses. They don't attempt to climb Everest too often in the fall or the winter. That's pretty rare, but there's still a decent amount of trekkers that come. So I think the younger generation sees it more as this is an economic opportunity. This is a very privileged area to be in, but where the older generation has a much stronger spiritual draw to the mountain itself.
Not only is the mountain big, and it seems to make its own weather,
Yes.
but when people travel on the mountain, it's very common for bad things to happen. It kind of takes on a personality, and I can see how people would say that's really much bigger than us, and it's making the decisions here. We're not. Those sorts of things. A statistic a while back, I'm trying to remember exactly what it was, so forgive me if I misquote it, but it was something along the lines of a third of the people that summit Everest don't survive the descent.
Yeah, yeah, more people do die on the descent on the way up, and that's a very good point that a lot of people don't know, and that's because you've expended all your adrenaline,
Mm,
all your energy to try to make it to the top, and I kind of akin it like climbing a tree. climbing a tree is all upper body, usually,
Yeah.
doing pull-ups essentially to get to the top of the tree. But getting back down that tall tree is all mental focus. You have to look where you point your toes. You have to make sure you don't make a mistake with your handholds to work your way gently back down that tree. That's very similar on coming down at Mount Everest. Now you're very hypoxic, right? You've got 1/3 the amount of density of air on the summit of Everest than you do down at sea level, so you can't think straight. You're not thinking clearly to begin with. Now you're completely expended your energy reserves because you've had that rush of adrenaline making it to the top, achieving a lifelong dream. For most people, it's a long process to try to get there, you know, and then so you don't have the energy and you're lacking the focus to make those deliberate steps every 3 feet in front of you, thousands and thousands and thousands of steps. Then things can go wrong from other elements, from weather, running out of oxygen, and so on. But yeah, ultimately that's why more people die on the descent, because of mental lapse or because of physical exertion, than people actually going up. And so yeah, that's something where you're only half the journey. And like Ed Viesturs used to say, making the summit is optional, getting back down is mandatory.
Yes.
And a lot of people forget to take that into account when they're getting close towards the summit or trying to get to the summit on their summit push during summit night.
When the earthquake happened and so many people died, buried in avalanches and what have you, um, did the local Sherpas think that the god had become angry?
That's a good question. I would say that some, yes, did, and then some took strictly, the scientific approach, because the reason why the Himalayas are the tallest mountains in the world and why Nepal is so immensely beautiful is also why it can be dangerous, because you have two tectonic plates slamming into each other that forms the Himalayan mountains by pushing it up, right?
Right.
Therefore, you have a lot of tectonic activity, and as people may not know, Everest is actually growing, still continues to grow every single day, about an inch a year, because again, it is the plates pushing in and pushing up the mountains of the Himalayas. So I think a lot of the younger people maybe took the approach that, yeah, okay, it's because where we are, no different than the Ring of Fire in Japan or so on. And others that say, yeah, it could be, the gods, being a little bit displeasured with what we are doing. So I think it's kind of a mixed bag there. But yeah, that avalanche, we talk about it actually pretty extensive in the film. We actually have footage from it as well, that happened, in 2015 when it killed 22 people at Everest Base Camp. That will always be a faithful day, in Nepalese history and of course in Everest lore as well.
Mm. Alex, I've been giving some thought to something, and that is that when we experience something in nature, especially, it could be any life experience, but when we experience something in nature, we can look to the science and say, we know what happened because of this, like your tectonic plates example. We can also say, how did I experience that event? How do I feel about that experience? What did it do to me, and what can I gain from it? And I don't mean to be egocentric, but though it changes from saying, well, we know what happened because of the scientific such and such, true enough, but our interpretation of the experience can be a life lesson. And some people would take the next step and lean into it's the spirituality of it.
Yeah.
The God was angry,
Yeah.
right? But I guess when I began to look at nature and say it has so many lessons to teach us as we journey through and experience all the amazing things, we don't have to solve every mystery. Some of the mysteries are just there to ponder. And it's in the pondering, I think, that sometimes we grow. And it helps me to enjoy myself in nature a little bit more when I'm interacting with it in a way of not just understanding, explaining, and naming, but experiencing it as, that was awesome.
Yeah,
You know?
absolutely. 100% spot on, Kurt. You're absolutely right. And you know what I say to people, they ask me about that, because I don't care how religious you may or may not be, what your background may be in theology and these kind of things. You spend 63 days in Nepal like we did for filming and so on, or 52
Mm-hmm.
days on the Everest expedition. It will ultimately affect you, because the spirituality around you is that powerful that there's no way you can really tune it out. It just really starts to affect you. And the other thing that was kind of interesting in my case, my main climbing partner. And I don't want to give away the films too much, because I don't want to kind of be the spoiler here. But he was a Buddhist monk for 12 years prior to getting into mountaineering. So along the trek and during the climb, I learned so much about Buddhism and about his spirituality, his spiritual relationship to the Khumbu Valley and to Mount Everest and so on, that ultimately it really, really had a strong effect on me. And there's no way to leave an experience like climbing Mount Everest without coming back and having been touched in one way or another, because it is just such a powerful place, and it is such a powerful experience, and it is such a difficult endeavor that ultimately, when you blend all those things together, it really, really touches you. And there's takeaways because of that I have taken away from the mountain in my experience in Nepal. And there's also life lessons that I've learned, about it that I might not have thought about before I went to Nepal. And it's exactly like you said. It's you being in the moment and be able to feel nature around you that directly has a direct impact on you and how it actually makes you feel in that moment. And in my case, also years thereafter coming back. Yeah.
It sounds like a real transformative experience.
100%. And May 21st will always be an anniversary to me, where people have children's birthdays or wedding anniversary. To me, it means something. And what I started, this tradition that I do now on May 21st, I go to a restaurant that happens to be in Golden, Colorado, that's owned by Sherpa people that are all from the Khumbu Valley, many of which, the villages I went through, people that I even know, I go and pay respect to them every May 21st by eating at their restaurant, And so it's one of these little things that I can do to kind of give myself back to that experience.
I assume you're talking about the Sherpa house.
That is correct.
Delightful place.
Absolutely.
Might as well throw a bone to the Sherpa house.
Absolutely. Absolutely delightful place. And so it's going to be one of those things, as long as I'm in town and as long as I'm capable of doing it, May 21st, I will be at the Sherpa house.
That's fun.
Yeah.
Well, when you got all the production work done, hours after hours after hours of content consolidated down into the documentary, into the main thrust of the story. Did it help you to process the whole experience? Did it lead you to discoveries that maybe you didn't even notice when you were in Nepal?
100%, Kurt, because you're right. I was so engaged in actually the post-production of which takes months and months and months of time to edit down 63 hours of content into 2D and in VR. So we had two separate editing groups, teams. We had a VR team because it's completely different editing VR than it is editing traditional 2D linear footage. So we had two separate teams that I had to constantly work in between and deal with on a daily basis. I was so engaged in looking at footage and putting together the storylines and so on between the VR and the 2D that I almost forgot to a large degree that I actually went and climbed Mount Everest, right? Or I actually was there until I saw the footage again. Oh yeah, I remember that in the ice fall, and me falling off an ice block, and these kind of different things that happen that we have to decide whether or not we want to put it in the film, or the avalanche that hit the ice fall, and these kind of different experiences that took place during the time that we were over there, that we had to make creative decisions on with regards to the filmmaking side of things, that it brought me right back as if I was just there yesterday. And you're right, it really did. And it also had me, recalling feelings and emotions that I, would have long drifted out of my consciousness because of how engaged and focused I was on the project at hand.
I think it's really important to somehow reflect on our adventures. And I think often people take some snapshots or, a little video with their cell phone, and then they jump back in the car and continue on, and they might be failing to have the experience.
Absolutely right. That is so true. Yeah. And in a day of digital media, social media, and so on, where, a lot of people want to make sure people know that they were at Bryce Canyon or they were here or they were there by posting something on social media, you're right that you might be able to lose perspective that, you're actually sitting there at Bryce Canyon. You're actually there sitting at Everest Base Camp or whatever the case may be, and you don't really take in what that means and the grandeur and the beauty of it all because you're more worried about making a caption of what that is to the rest of the world, right?
Yeah, very much so. We heard your story, your why. You had made a promise to yourself when you were 14. And you decided to make good on that promise. And then it enlarged. It said, no, this got to be about more than me. And I love that progression, but I don't want you to put words in people's mouths, but having been at base camp and climbed and interacted with the people there, what do you think the whys are? Can you list the reasons why people strike out to climb Everest?
Yeah, it's all across the board. I think the unifying whys it is to achieve either a childhood dream or a promise or something, similar to them. I think it's okay. Is it an objective? Because they're doing it in order to raise awareness for cancer research or a children's charity back in the UK or something like that. That could be the main objective. Is it just something that they were fascinated ever since 1953 when Everest was climbed and all the lore with Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay, or the book Into Thin Air from the 1996 disaster,
Yep.
all these different things that add to this massive lore, because arguably Everest is the most iconic landmark and human adventure experience on Earth. It doesn't matter. A lot of people don't know where the Louvre is in Paris or where the Grand Canyon is or even where Las Vegas is. But everyone around the world has a connotation of what Mount Everest means to them. In all the 196 countries of this planet, people know Mount Everest. So they have, because of all those years of this lore that's developed around this amazing place, they have some kind of connotation of what it means to them. And therefore, if you start to just dig into Mount Everest, you can peel all day long the onion back and back and back and back to where it now really impacts you so much that the why becomes apparent for whoever you may be, right? And so the whys are a little bit across the board, but they're also really kind of also down the same lane to a large degree. It's an objective why, it seems to be. Your objective is I'm here to experience and or climb this mountain because of this. And it usually leads back to either I want to do something for, a cause, or I always said I wanted to climb Mount Everest, or I was always, fascinated with Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay, that, what, I now have that opportunity to try myself. And the other thing is that Mount Everest base camp is a 1 mile long international tent city, for 2 months of the year. It sits
Yeah.
on the world's highest glacier that moves up to 3 to 6 feet a day, and you have people, you hear languages from all across the world, in a 1 mile stretch of tents, all with that common why objective to try to make it to the top of Everest. So it's almost like the United Nations of adventuring for 2 months of the year. So it's a really fascinating place in its own right, just to go to Everest Base Camp and witness that multicultural aspect with that same objective in mind, to try to get to that peak that sits right between, Nuptse and the West Shoulder from Base Camp. You can just see a sliver of it, depending on where you are and what the weather conditions are like.
It sounds like a very, very fascinating experience. One of the whys has to be because it's the tallest.
That's absolutely right.
And that's the way humans are. Just to illustrate the point, listeners, listeners out there, what's the second tallest peak on Earth?
K2. And most
How
people
many
don't know
people
that.
knew that?
Not very many.
And
What's the
K2
second
does not
fastest
get climbed
car?
very much.
What's the second fastest car record at the Indy 500 or a Formula One race, right? Or who finished second
Yes.
in the NBA Finals in 2022?
Second place is awesome, people. Silver medalist, Rock.
That's right.
And we need to
Absolutely
remember
right.
that.
Yep.
But it's so funny how human nature is. Everest is the tallest. So that's the one, because that's the way we think.
And that's the first thing you see in the trailer for the 97-minute documentary is a guy named Russell Bryce, a very famous guy in Everest history and commercial climbing on Everest. He was basically the first guy to start doing this stuff. And I interviewed him for 2.5 hours in his expedition tent, just me, my cameraman, my audio, just us. We had a very intimate, 2.5 hours together. And the opening scene in the 97-minute documentary trailer is him saying, "Nowhere in the world would you climb an ice fall like this. Nowhere, except for on Mount Everest." And the reason why is because the highest mountain in the world sits behind it. Otherwise, you would never step into the Khumbu Icefall, which is arguably the 2.5 miles of the most deadly terrain on Earth. And the only reason why you do it is because you're trying to get to the top of Mount Everest.
Wow. Yeah, that's some perspective right there.
Yeah, yeah. They wouldn't do it on K2. You wouldn't do it for the second highest mountain in the world, but you do it for the highest mountain in the world.
Of course, everyone's minds are dancing around the question. Is it just ego?
I think for me it was a promise. So it was more about, like I said before, if I couldn't honor a commitment to myself, how can I honor my promises or commitments to you, Kurt,
Yes.
or anyone else? Because otherwise, 20, 30 years later, I might have been sitting in a bottle of Jack Daniels with regret because I lied to myself. Because I didn't uphold that promise of a 14-year-old child sitting there on the couch in Omaha, Nebraska. That might have eaten me up mentally because, like I said, if you can't be honest with yourself, who are you going to be honest to? So I can only speak from my experience and why I ultimately went to do it because I had to do it. Or at least try. I mean, obviously, there's no guarantees that you're going to succeed. Less people make it up than do make it up, and so there was no promises that was going to happen, especially on a first attempt, and then filming and hosting and all the other complexities that go along with that project. But it was something that I had to try. And actually, I'll state it here, and I didn't tell anybody this why I was, on my Garmin GPS writing, archaic little text on the little keypad back home because I didn't want people to know about the constant avalanches, about the helicopter rescues, all the danger and all the things
Yeah.
that you're experiencing on a daily basis. Because I'm sure that my loved ones back home were worried enough as is. So I kept it very
Sure.
vanilla. Oh, we're at Camp One. We're melting some snow in order to have some water and to make a backpacker pantry kind of a deal. I just kept it very, very even keel. Didn't mention about any of the chaos or any of the danger that's going on around us because I didn't want people to worry more than they had to. But when I got to Camp 4, and I said this to my cameraman when we went for our summit push, because once you make that decision, obviously, you don't climb Mount Everest just one time. The reason why I took 43 days from base camp to the summit and back, you have to go up and down the mountain to acclimatize, to
Right.
shock your body, to produce more red blood cells in order to survive in that hypoxic environment, and to move gear up the mountain as well. But I told my cameraman, I said before I left out, I said, look, if I die, there's 340 people that have died on Everest, and then there's about 345 to 350 people that have died being there, but 340 climbers. I said, just if it's possible, grab those memory cards and do something with it, right?
Yeah.
Let this not be all for naught, at least the part of the mountain that I filmed myself. Grab that. And I trust your judgment to do something with it. But I told myself when I got to Camp 4 and before I stepped out to the tent at midnight to go for the summit, and I let out with only one other person, my buddy who was the expedition leader. And the rest of the team was behind us. I said to myself, and I never told anybody this prior to that, I said, this is only going to turn out one of two ways. Either I'm going to make it to the top, I'm going to come back down with 63 hours of content, or I might be 341, 342, 300, whatever it might be at that time, and no one will ever hear from me again. You might see me again depending on where I ended up falling, but no one will ever hear from me again. And I really resigned myself that it was going to be down to one of those two scenarios. Because again, I was so involved in the project because I wouldn't have just kind of to some degree let myself down being that close. It wasn't really summit fever as it was focus. And of course, there's a lot of people that depended on me back with regards to the quest production itself. Right. So I was carrying that burden as well on my shoulders that I had to be successful in order to make these two movies, or actually three movies that we made out of it, successful. Otherwise, they would have been all for naught potentially.
Personally, I totally get it. And the reason I say that is I love climbing mountains. And regretfully, I've never been to 15,000 feet. I've climbed a lot of 14,000 foot mountains, but I climb for the sake of the climb. And the summit is fun, but it's not the reason I climb. Climbing the mountain, obviously it can be a trite metaphor for life, but it's also a life experience, and every single mountain has a personality and a different experience. It feels good. To be out there struggling against gravity, climbing the steeps, you your hands get chewed up from grabbing a hold of sharp rocks, and your knees hurt, and you're using your lungs like they were meant to be used.
Yeah, that's right.
And,
that's right.
I love just the whole idea of the exertion and nature and the weather and the views, the animals, the whole scene, all of it.
100%.
Right? I totally get it. And I have had a lot of questions from people. Why would you climb Everest? How many people die doing that? And I'm like, how many people really live because they did that?
That's exactly right.
And
Like I said,
maybe
that
it's not for
experience.
everybody,
Yeah, like you said,
but
that experience, taking that home, right, that we talked about earlier. If you're able to, and even if you don't make it successfully up to the summit, that experience will definitely stick with you for the rest of life. For some people, it haunts them because you got to understand the personality types that are typically there. They're type A people, highly trained ultra marathon runners, Olympic athletes, you name it, highly trained people that are going there to try to achieve this objective. So the personality types themselves don't lend themselves to turning around. Right? There's no
right.
little birdie in your shoulder that says, "Oh yeah, you should listen to your body. Your body's telling you the truth, but continue to lie to yourself, or should you turn around?" Right?
Yeah.
Because you shouldn't be there. Physiologically, we're not meant to be. There's never been a civilization that's lived above 17,000 feet, and Everest Base Camp is at 17,500 feet. So you will die if you stay there indefinitely. It's just a matter of what rate you die at, depending on how high you go. Right? So your body is constantly telling you, "Get out of here." Turn down, turn around,
Wow.
and then your immune system shuts down, your taste bud receptors shut down, so nothing tastes good up there. You have no desire to eat, so you're forcing stuff down your throat just because you know you have to. You don't really feel like you want to drink, and you have to drink 3 to 8 liters a day just to stay hydrated. So you're drinking an exponential amount of water, way more than you would when you're normally hiking around, and so you're fighting all these things that are up against you just to keep going. Right? And so
Mm,
it takes that
yes.
drive, it takes that personality, and it takes that ability to, like you said, to suffer. But to suffer to a point where you have to dig 20% deeper than anything you've ever done. I was in better shape when I was climbing Mount Everest than when I was playing Division I college soccer, which is crazy to think. But I was in better shape because of the training that I did going a year prior before going to Everest, my 7-day-a-week, 2 to 3 hour day routine that I didn't take a single day off. I stopped drinking the whole nine, trying to get myself physically in the best shape of my life because I didn't want that to be the X factor that may make me not successful on the mountain. That you have to be able to dig 20% deeper, and that's the finite little fine margins that you have, as thin as your hair, on whether or not you make it or don't make it, whether you may live or die, or come back down with 63 hours of footage. Right? Those
Mm,
margins are that thin because of all the different variables that come into play, and the thing that other people don't realize, it's physiological. So it's not like you can train all you want like I did, and or an ultra marathon runner does, or so on, and you can be mentally tough because if you're running 100-mile races, you're mentally tough, no question about it. If
yes.
you're a two-time Olympic gold medalist and the world record holder in cycling, you are mentally tough. You can probably jump on the bike here in Denver, Colorado, ride it to my old hometown of Omaha, Nebraska, in one sitting without even stopping, 563 miles. But that doesn't mean you're going to make it up to the summit of Mount Everest. And that perfect case example was that. There was a climber that was an Olympic athlete, two-time gold medalist, world record holder, and their biggest goal in life wasn't to actually win gold medals and to be a world record holder on cycling and achieve the pinnacle of cycling. It was actually, as a childhood dream similar to mine, to climb Mount Everest. And they had to get helicopter evacuated from Camp 2 because their oxygen saturation level was so low that it was as if you were in a coma, and they were within
Wow.
hours of dying. And so it had nothing about them being physically prepared or mentally tough. It was genetically they were not prone to go to altitude. And so you have to choose your parents wisely. And
As if
so
you could.
exactly. And so unfortunately you don't know that until you go. You know, and so that's one of those big X factors you don't know until you go, and ultimately, the mountain will shake itself out when it comes to that.
Well, last question, because we have filled up our time allotment, but relate to us some experience that you had with the Sherpas or any of the Nepalese people where you just made a connection and realized I'm going to remember this person for the rest of my life. This has shaped who I am today.
Yep, absolutely. And I communicate with them still on a weekly basis. And because to me, I look, if you're going to stereotype groups, cultures, countries, the Sherpa people are the salt of the earth. These people, and I've been to other parts of the world where I've witnessed a similar, the Bedouin people of the Arabian Peninsula and some other places where you see this, and you see a commonality of why that is. Obviously, the Bedouin are not religiously the same as the Sherpa people, not even close, but they live in these extremely hostile environments,
Yes.
right? So in order to survive, you have to have a very strong sense of communal bonding and family in order for everybody to make it. Otherwise, you're not going to make it. And so that kind of mentality has continued on within the Sherpa people or the Bedouin people in the Arabian Peninsula and so on, that they will give you the shirt off your back, even if they don't barely have a shirt of their own. And so that that thing, that belief and that structure of that communal bonding, and to really generate strong spiritual relationships is something that I took with me from the Sherpa people when I came back. And because of that, the other outside influences of life that seem to annoy you on a daily basis, like, oh, the Amazon guy said he was supposed to be here today and it's not coming until tomorrow, or because Memorial Day, the trash pickup didn't come. These little trite things that are nuisances in our Western style of life are no longer that serious to me anymore.
Yeah.
Because I really have gotten a greater understanding of what's really important, because of not only my experience on Mount Everest, but my direct bonding with the Sherpa people and the people that I was there with on my expedition team and so on, going to Mount Everest and just spending additional time in Kathmandu and Nepal filming the amazing sights and sounds of that environment.
Well, Alex, thank you very much for sharing with us all of this. Please give us the name of your website, the VR film, and the documentary again.
Yep,
and other ways that people might be able to get in touch with you.
Exactly. So if you want to watch the 26-minute The Quest Everest VR documentary, or you want to watch the 97-minute The Quest Everest 2D documentary, all you have to do is go to thequesteverest.com. Again, thequesteverest.com, and you can read more about it, see the trailers, and see the different platforms that you can link through to watch it. You can also follow us along. It's, like I said, it's an ongoing series. That's designed to take global audiences on these educational thrill rides to reveal these rarely seen stories that they might not know about a location or be able to experience themselves. So if you go to social media, you can go to the Quest Series page on Facebook or to the Quest Series on Instagram and so on, and follow along there to see what's next down the line with regards to the Quest Series. But you can also link through to thequesteverest.com to get all of those additional links to follow out on.
Well, I want to also thank you for getting to the heart of the matter. not just the climb, not just the achievement, not just the big goal, but the heart of the matter. And when you decided to try to bring it back for the rest of us, that probably changed everything. But I for one, want to say thank you.
Well, you know what? Thank you so much, Kurt. I'm humbly honored to be able to talk to you today about this experience and about these films that we're fortunate enough to be able to produce, because really to me it is, like you said, to be able to share it with the rest of the world. I'm just a conduit to the information that you get to see within those films.
Well, and to all the viewers and listeners out there, I want to say thank you for watching the Adventure Sports Podcast. And your dream may not be Everest, but I picked up on an element here. Sometimes we need to make ourselves a big promise, something that is worthwhile to pursue and to learn from, and it can shape our whole lives. So think about that. What is your big promise? And until the next show, please do get out there and have some fun.